One phone on a speaker, one image blown up on 1,000 screens, one necklace caught between her fingers like a verdict. Leila stood at the edge of the ballroom as if she did not belong to the light spilling off crystal chandeliers. The Jasper Hall band played on, too loud, and the crowd did what crowds always do when they can pretend they are not watching a private collapse. They watched. Lana, in a dress that could have been made of sunlight, smiled at Liam as if nothing could disturb the script she had written for this night. Their engagement had been paid for months in invitations and alliances. The Reed house had never been so proud. Leila had come because she was Lana's sister. She had come because she had nowhere else to be. A guest in the back held up his phone. Someone tapped the screen. The projector over the cake blinked. For a second, the projected image was nothing but color. Then, a video. Short, jerky, uploaded from a phone and already polished by gossip. Leila felt the room tilt. She saw herself there, not as the country girl she was, but in the clip's breathless light, laughing, stumbling through a narrow side alley, and then an older man, Mr. Zimmer, putting a necklace on her. The camera cut. The image of the necklace flashed, and the entire room inhaled together. "No," someone whispered. A laugh, sharp and ugly, broke from a table near the band. Lana's smile faltered for a second, and then she found it again, faster than Leila's heart could. Liam looked away. Phones came up. Recordings began. For the first time in her life, Leila felt the air change from curious to prosecutorial. "Where did she get that?" Mr. Reed asked, voice pitched to be heard by neighbors and enemies. His face was already the color of an accusation. Leila reached for the air as if she could catch the story and throw it back, clutching at the empty where truth should be. She remembered the night in fragments, a market, a laugh, a borrowed cloak. She remembered helping Mr. Zimmer across a broken step after he had stumbled, a kindness that was paid in attention and a piece of jewelry he pressed into her palm because he liked the way it gleamed in the rain. She had not kissed him. She had not promised anything. She had taken the necklace because she had thought it was a gift for the girl who would be Lana's bridesmaid, a charm to stop old superstitions. She kept it in her pocket and forgot. Tonight, that forgetfulness became a rope. "You expect us to believe this?" Mrs. Reed hissed, looking at Lana as if she wanted permission to be outraged on her daughter's behalf. Lana stepped forward then, sudden and polished, eyes on Liam like a predator that finally finds the scent she wanted. "Liam, look," she said, voice light as a knife. This is Leila. She has been lying to us, to everyone." Liam didn't know what to do. He cleared his throat. He had rehearsed his response to political conversations, to business deals, to appreciative glances at parties. He had not rehearsed betrayal broadcast across chandeliers. He watched his fiancée, then the video, then Leila, as if deciding which story to believe would be as simple as choosing a new tie. The crowd shifted. Phones brightened the faces like lanterns in a sea of judgment. A uncle made a face. A cousin whispered with relish. Some recorded. Some laughed. The clip pulsed through the room on a dozen devices, and where it landed, there was damage. "Look at her face," someone said. She knew. Leila's mouth moved, but nothing came out that made sense. It's not what it looks like," she told them. The words were small. In the silence that followed, small things could not hold. "You were with that man," Mr. Reed said, shutting her down with the authority of a father who had to be seen as righteous. "At night, at the guest house, a stranger, with a necklace that does not belong in our house." "Her reputation," Lana said, carefully. The phrase pretended to be gentle and killed anyway. She could ruin everything. She had rehearsed this. Someone always rehearsed ruin and then handed out the lines to whatever relatives needed them. Leila felt hands on her shoulders. Not nearly kind enough. "Take her to the guest quarters," Mr. Reed ordered. "Keep her away. We will decide what to do in the morning." It was hardly a gesture of mercy. It was containment. Two of Lana's cousins moved in like they had done this before. Firm hands, practiced. Leila did not go quietly because she couldn't. She clung to a corner of the tablecloth, to some memory of her grandmother's hands. And then someone pulled her away. Someone's shoe dragged through the melted chocolate on the cake table, and someone else hissed in anger at the waist. No one seemed to notice she was being carried like a thing. The projector hummed on, unaware, and the clip kept cycling. Someone at the back, a man with a camera leaning against his chest, shouted, "Play it again," and the room obliged. From the corridor that led to the guest rooms, Leila could see the yard. A taxi idled by the curb. She thought of walking away, of stepping into the dark and into whatever came after, but the room tightened. Her father grabbed her wrist, not roughly but firmly, refusing her the theater of running away. "Shame the family," he said. "Think of Lana. Think of the future. We will fix this." Fix? She wanted to ask how they proposed to fix a video that felt like a million tiny knives. Instead, she said, "You can ask me anything. I'll tell—" "Not now," Mrs. Reed snapped. "This is not the time." Lana's hand brushed Leila's shoulder, a touch neither kind nor wholly cold. There was no pity there. Lana said, "You must understand," she said, as if they had rehearsed a conversation and were running through final lines. "This is beyond us." The guest room's door closed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Leila sat on the narrow bed that had once been the housemaid's and listened to the party continue through the thin wall, like a cruel second life still going on without her. The clip kept playing in her head with that same cruel repetition. She pressed her palms to her eyes until the world behind her lids was nothing but the smear of light from the projector. Outside, the crowd thinned. Glasses clinked. A speech was given about new alliances and brighter tomorrows. Lana moved back into the center of the stage. She took Liam's arm and smiled a smile that did not match the tremor in her fingers. Leila swallowed bile. The necklace, a loop of glass and metal she had not cherished, rested in a napkin on the bedside table, as if it had already become evidence. Some of the partygoers left with gossip to sow. Others, the sort who made money on bad luck, lingered to ensure the narrative had its necessary chorus. One of them filmed the guest house from his phone. The clip would be re-uploaded in different hues. Some would caption it with rumors, others with hate. The internet would light itself on the story, and everyone would be watching from rooms like this one. She slept in fits and starts, the cardboard dreams of a life that might have continued without this. Morning came not with mercy, but with two visitors. They were men in dark coats, Lana's allies, bearing the kind of sympathy that feels like a verdict. They read prepared notes about consequences and honor. They did not ask how Leila felt. They did not ask whether the clip had been edited. They asked instead what she intended to do for the Reed name. "You will come to the meeting," Mr. Reed said. "We will make the right choice." Choices in that room were not given to her. They were made for her. She left the house with a small bag and a face that seemed to be made of someone else's resolve. Two cousins walked her to the gate like chaperones to a fallen comet. On the street outside, the press had already gathered. The same red microphones and intrusive smiles, the same flashes. A camera's vinefinder picked up her dirt-smudged shoes and the stain of yesterday's cake. Someone whispered, "Jinx," like a verdict made for her. "Where will you go?" a reporter asked, as if the real question were whether she had a plan for disgrace. "Anywhere but here," she said. She made it 2 blocks before someone shoved a phone under her face and asked the same livid questions. She was not quick enough to be graceful. She was not practiced in regret that suited the cameras. She fled. A taxi took her to the bus station, only a handful of miles and a lifetime from Jasper Hall. When the bus wheezed out of the town, she watched the river slide beneath the bridge and thought of all the ways a small town trims lives to the shape of its fears. She had been taught to shrink, to apologize for being noisy, for living too large in a place that valued neatness. She sat at the far back, where the upholstery smelled like old winters. She held the napkin with the necklace until the metal dug a crescent into her palm, as if the artificial weight could be a compass. Somewhere between towns, the bus slowed by a diner. That was where she saw him, though at first she did not know who he was. He wasn't the sheen of a movie star, nor the hard edges of some businessman she had only seen in magazines. He looked tired in a way that did not lessen his presence. Dark suit, dark coat, hands tucked into pockets as if protecting them from touching people who hurt. Fabian, traveling ahead of his master with an envelope meant for the Zeller estate, had recognized the necklace before anyone else. He had handled it for a delivery 2 days earlier. A small thing meant for a guest at a luncheon, an antique he'd believed had been sold to a gentleman with the kind of quiet name that opens doors. He had set the small bauble aside in a velvet box and had watched it leave in the wrong hand. The pattern was unmistakable to someone who had lived amid fine things long enough to know a family crest from a coin's glint. He pulled out his phone and checked the message he'd received an hour ago. A photograph the Zeller family prized for its association, the same metalwork, the same pattern, had gone missing from a private collection. The family had whispered about it in the way a dynasty whispers when lineage is the ledger that keeps them alive. When Fabian saw Leila's picture on the bus, photographs of her that had been circulated because of the clip, he thought at first it was simply gossip. But then the necklace in the footage, and the necklace now in the napkin in Leila's wet hands, matched with an almost surgical certainty. Someone had put their family mark in the hands of a stranger. He called his boss. Miles Zeller was the kind of man who listened to little things. Little things, he believed, were how the world turned. He had been away at meetings. He had been keeping to the rules that laid out a future for him, a certain marriage, a certain line. But he had also been told, in the same breath as lineage warnings, that an heirloom could not be wrong when it chose a hand. Fabian described the scene over the line with an urgency practiced by servants whose livelihoods depended on discretion. A clip at an engagement, a family flayed by rumor, and one girl with the necklace clasped in a napkin like a confession. He explained where the bauble had come from, whose hands had polished it, and how it might have been swapped. He asked only to step in and see. Miles listened. He imagined the necklace, its small metal loops catching light. He imagined the history stitched to it like thread. He thought of how family legacies demanded continuity. He thought of what it meant if a stranger, that was the operative idea, had the mark of his house. So he came to the bus stop like a man who had always known he'd end up in small rooms like this, pulling at strings from behind. He paid for a ticket and sat near the back, near a girl who had the look of someone whose life had been rerouted by a single image. He did not approach Leila like a prince. He did not offer platitudes. He watched. He watched the way she held the napkin, the way she put the necklace up to the light as if it spoke to her. There was something about the way she looked that made him think twice about the family narratives he'd been raised on. She was not the kind of woman his world expected. Perhaps that made the necklace's appearance all the more impossible. When the bus stopped in the next town, she stepped down, as if the future were some uncertain path. She did not have a plan. She had only the weight of the small ornament in her hand, and the heavier weight of the way a video had made the whole world know her shame. Miles followed at a distance. He did not wish to alarm her. He was not a man who relished spectacle. But there were things that debtors of reputation alone would not trust to be random. He wanted the full story before missteps were taken. He wanted to know whether his family relic had been stolen or simply mistaken. He wanted, with a clarity that should have made him cruel, to secure what his family had prescribed. He told himself he would offer her nothing until he understood. But when the taxi she hailed took her toward the outskirts of town, he paid her fare. At first, she thought he was the stranger everyone else had become. Another camera, another mouth. He touched his card to the meter, then turned and sat opposite her in the taxi, because, strange protective impulse, he did not trust her to explain herself to a world bent on making her smaller. "You're Leila Reed," he said, in a voice that did not ask for permission to be recognized. She startled. It had already become a habit to be recognized for the worst thing that could be said. She pulled the napkin tighter. "You don't have to speak to me," she murmured. "I'm Miles Zeller," he said. The name came as if it were his own skin. He saw her analyzing it the way one checks a mark on a paper. "Fabian told me about the necklace." "They think I'm—" she began. Her throat tightened. "They think I know," he cut in gently. "I saw the clip." He did not fill his mouth with relief that would have been undeserved. He had, minutes before, been inclined to treat this as a family matter. Now he found himself regarding the girl with a new kind of attention. She did not apologize for being herself. She did not ask for pity. There was a steadiness in her that made his role complicated. "Why would someone do this?" she asked. And the words were not just about the video now, but the deeper question of why cruelty had to be ceremonial. "People are complicated," Miles said. "So are families." He offered no solution. Instead, he asked a small, practical question. Did she want to come somewhere to be away from cameras? When she shook her head, he saw the edges of hope crumble. She would not be forced into his world out of charity. He did not make that offer. Then, very deliberately, he made another one. "If I can find out what happened to the necklace, if I can find out who started that video, would you come to the Zeller house to talk?" he asked. Not as anyone's solution, just to talk. It was, for him, a neutral proposal. For Leila, it was the hint of a lifeline. "Why would you do that?" she asked, suspicious as a cat. "Because some things are watches, and some things are warnings," he said. "And because the wrong hands on the wrong story make consequences that can last a lifetime." It was not quite an offer of rescue. It was an offer of investigation. It offered her a place to be when the town's voice had gone baritone with accusation. It would bring her under a roof of wealth and rules that were foreign. It would place her in the orbit of men who traded vouchers of reputation like currency. It would also give her space to breathe, a rare commodity. She considered. She thought of the bus moving away and of the gossip that would follow her like dogs with sharp teeth. She thought of Lana's face, perfect, preened, and of her father's hand, which had not been gentle. She thought of the necklace in the napkin and how it felt like a thin rope tying her to an accusation. She thought of the way the town would remember her if she stayed. "One night," she said at last, "just to talk." He nodded, but there was something more to his eyes than the map of a man who liked order. He did not smile the way rich men smiled when they offered help. His look was more complicated, part curiosity, part permission. He checked again with Fabian, a terse conversation over the phone that made Leila's palms sweat. Fabian's voice crackled with acquiescence and something like relief. By the time they reached the gates of Zeller Manor, the house itself was more myth than wood. It sat on a hill like a declaration. Servants moved like tides of silence. The man who had brought her to the threshold offered an umbrella and did not look away as she passed into the rain-damp driveway. Inside, the room smelled of polished wood and quiet. A maid, whose name would later be useful as evidence that people kept memory, took her shawl. Miles offered her a glass of water that he poured himself. He did not ask her to change. He asked her, instead, to tell him what she remembered. So she did. Piece by small piece, market laughter, the man who slipped, the way hands move when they mean something gentle and not scandalous. She told the story of a night that had been nothing to be leveraged into ruin. Miles listened like someone learning a language whose vocabulary hurt to hear. "Someone planted it," she said finally, voice flat as bone. "Someone wanted there to be a picture. Someone wanted the necklace to be proof." He did not say the word conspirator. He said, "Who would gain?" and meant both the obvious and everything lurking behind it. Lana's name did not come from his mouth, but it trembled between them like a current. Leila did not put the accusation there. She had watched her sister move with the sort of graceful cruelty that fits a plan. She had seen the way Lana's eyes had hovered on Liam as if evaluating currency. She had seen the practiced calm fall into fury at the first sight of gossip. The evidence did not amount to a verdict. It did add to a map. Miles stood. He went to a shelf and drew out a thin ledger. Old habits of a man who kept lists of small things. He wrote down what she had told him. He wrote down the time of the clip and where it had first appeared. He asked about the gift, the jewelers who might have made anything like it. He asked for names she thought suspicious. "Is any of this dangerous?" she asked, the word too large for the hour. He closed the ledger and said, "Only if we let it be." He did not promise safety. He promised interest. It was a small and dangerous bargain. He would use his time and his money to look into the matter. For reasons neither of them would entirely understand yet, he wanted to. "There's a coat," he said, abruptly, like the man who wants to put an end to a cold breeze. "You will stay the night. We have rooms, no cameras." It was not permission from the world. It was, at least, permission to rest. A bellboy led her to a room with a bed serviceable enough to hold a broken woman, a window that looked over trimmed hedges, and a mirror that did not look back with scorn. Leila undid the napkin and set the necklace on the dresser. It looked insignificant there, perhaps because nothing so small should have caused such ruin. She turned it over in her fingers. The metal was cold and heavy. It had the faintest engraving on its clasp, a mark she could not read, but that Miles had recognized from a tiny family brochure Fabian had once shown him. She thought of Lana across town with Liam, the engagement continuing, as if the previous night had not rearranged everything. She thought of her parents, their faces mapped now by the night. She thought of the clip that had made everyone certain. There were, she knew, choices ahead. For now, she had a bed, a roof, and a stranger's promise to look. Miles left her with a key and a word that felt like both a shield and a challenge. "Don't let them make you small," he said, "even if they think they already have." She laughed, a short, incredulous thing that tasted like salt. "I am small," she said. "That's what everyone knows." "Small is not the same as erased," he replied. That night, as the manor settled into the hush that belongs to places with too many rooms and too many secrets, Leila lay awake and listened to the house breathe. Somewhere a clock clicked. Somewhere a servant folded sheets. The necklace lay on the nightstand like a thin accusation waiting to be answered. In the morning, the house would make its inquiries. Fabian would make calls. They would board flights and read ledgers and send for old receipts from jewelers who kept histories like bones. The video would be watched, dissected, statements would be made. For now, in the dim, Leila let herself imagine a different ending, one where a small, misguided kindness remained just that, one where the necklace had no more power than the glove of a passerby. She let herself dream, foolishly, that the wrong sister might yet be uncovered. A knock came gently at the door. A maid entered with tea. She had the quiet eyes of someone who had seen many people come passing through the manor, their dramas like snowflakes, different, delicate, and briefly admired. "Mr. Zeller asked me to tell you breakfast will be served in the conservatory," she said. "If you would like." She paused, offering her hands like an afterthought. "There are journals, if you need anything written down." "Thank you," Leila said, because gratitude at times felt like currency in a house that traded in privilege. She rose, smoothing the dress she had worn to the party, now less triumphant and more like a uniform of the wounded. As she walked down the corridor toward the conservatory, portraits watched her, a lineage of stern faces who had never worn a label of scandal. She felt, absurdly, that one of them might have sympathized had it been of use. In the conservatory, light fell like a verdict through delicate glass. Servants moved with quiet efficiency. Miles sat at the table with coffee, unreadable in his focus. He did not offer intimacy, only a chair. It was a formality that felt safer than pity. Other guests were there, some old friends of the Zeller house, a cousin who asked only polite questions, and Fabian, who hovered like a man with a ledger he wanted to keep closed until necessary. Fabian refrained from unnecessary comments. He had reported what he knew. He had already placed in the folds of his memory the names of jewelers and the receipts that might heal or hurt reputations. "You have a family who has made a story about you," Miles said to Leila. "And you have," he turned slightly, "someone who thinks the necklace has meaning beyond a pretty trinket." "It does?" she asked, bitter that an object could have shifted her life like a weather vane. "It belonged to a private collection," Fabian said, dropping the small fact like a grain. "A specific design. An emblem is on the clasp. Families keep such things for reasons of continuity." He did not speak beyond that. He offered no excuses, he offered facts. Miles folded his hands. "I will look into how that item came into your possession," he said. "If it was stolen, we will find out who took it. If it was planted," he let the sentence hang like a promise, "we will find out who made the video." Leila felt herself relax a little, as if someone had leased her a small amount of time she did not deserve. "Why would someone plant it?" she asked. Fabian's answer was a shrug that carried the weight of 1,000 small betrayals. People want things: money, marriage, reputation. If you can hand a town a story, people will eat it. It's cheap and it lasts. "Could someone gain from Lana's misfortune?" she asked anyway, because suspicion took root easily. Fabian glanced at Miles, who did not answer. Miles had his thoughts, like a man removing a calculation from his mind to measure it again. "There are too many hands that can arrange a story," he said at last. "We will check cameras, receipts, testimonies. We will begin with those who had motive." Leila's life, in the past, had consisted of small certainties. She would milk the cow in the mornings, chat with the woman at the market, eat dinners where someone else decided when she had done wrong. Now, a stranger's roof covered her, and a set of men she had never known promised the machinery of inquiry. The irony tasted like incense. A girl blamed for untruths would now become the subject of a private investigation by the very people who made reputations official. And there was another irony yet, that the man watching her over the edge of his coffee cup seemed to measure her not with the humiliating scales of her town, but with something else, something more dangerous. "Mr. Zeller?" she asked, and it startled her how much she relied on titles now, as if a name could be a shield. He did not like to be called by his surname. He liked to be known by the steadier use of his first, clean as an instruction. But here he allowed the name to stand between them like a pause. "Call me Miles," he said finally. "We will begin at 9. Rest. I will ask my secretary to show you the tapes from the area outside the hall last night. There are often cameras in cabs, in shops, and in cars. People film everything." She went to the room again with the necklace on the dresser, and for the first time since the clip had rewound her life, she felt a plan forming. Not an escape, but a reclamation. She would be part of whatever came next. She would be a witness to her own story. The next morning, the assistant brought a small box of photographs and a USB drive. Miles's staff were precise. They were silent in the way that people said less. Fabian poured coffee. Maps lay on the table like blueprints of accusation. They played footage. It was evidence in little sharp pieces, a clip of the lane outside Jasper Hall, a shaky hand that caught the silhouettes of partygoers, a delivery man who passed a parcel, a woman with a camera who had filmed the alley from a window. Someone had recorded a man, Mr. Zimmer, leaving alone. At no point in the first round of footage did it show intimacy. It showed, cruelly, a sequence of small events that could be read into whatever narrative a hungry town chose. Leila watched it all, her stomach a nest of nerves. She saw how a single image could be angled until it was a verdict. She saw, too, the minute things that told a different story. That she had been helping Mr. Zimmer to his feet. That the necklace had been a quick, private line of thanks, not an emblem of some more damning intimacy. "That's not enough," Fabian said, care in his voice. "We need the one from the alley camera at the east gate. It should show last night's foot traffic. If someone staged it, the timing will show." "I will send for it," Miles said. His voice had the precision of a man who gave orders for a living and liked to see them followed. "And we will check any jewelry receipts for anyone who might have the same pattern." The day filled with small steps that felt like progress. People who could move things moved them. There was an efficiency to the manner that made processes out of panic. Leila felt both washed by it and small within it. She was not used to being treated like a case file. She was used to being a chapter in other people's stories. Hours later, when she walked through the gardens to clear the fog from her head, Miles joined her. The sky was low, a brooding sheet of gray. The hedges were clipped like questions. "Do you know how many people believe what they see?" he asked, and it was not a rhetorical question. "Too many," she said. "More than those who know the truth." He paused. "Sometimes the truth is worse because it asks for action," he said. "And sometimes it's kinder because it means responsibility." She considered what he'd said. "Are you going to take responsibility?" she asked. He looked at her then, long enough to look past her and at the life that had been paused in Jasper Hall. "I don't know what responsibility means yet," he admitted. "But I know how to search. I know the right people to find the things people have hidden." It was, again, a bargain of sorts. He would look, she would participate. They were alliances of convenience and curiosity, stitched together by the same thread that had made her ruin, the necklace. Back in Jasper Hall, Lana woke to declarations already being made. She met guests for breakfast with a face that had been carefully composed into composure. She had not slept as well as she pretended. The engagement continued. Liam was stoic in a way that hurt. He refused to give scandal more oxygen than necessary, which meant he walked a tight line. He wanted distance from the story, but not from the woman who would be his wife. He measured his future like a ledger, and the clip had put a charge into that calculation. If Leila had expected Lana to be sorrowful, if she had expected remorse, she was disappointed. There was no remorse because there was too much to accomplish by public denials and private adjustments. Lana had a strategy: reposition, stabilize, and if necessary, rewrite the facts. She had already drafted a social explanation for the town, one that painted herself not as opportunistic but as pragmatic. In her view, the world owed her the chance to keep it polished. When Lila's name was mentioned at the family table that morning, Lana's voice was a careful scalpel. "We are not monsters," she said to the locals. "We will handle this discreetly." Discreet, in a small town, means a kind of cruel ironing out. It meant someone else taking responsibility for the cleaning. Lana gave a little speech to friends and made it clear that reputations were fragile things. Hers was not only fragile, but fought for. Leila heard about the speech through messages and through passing whispers that the Zellers had extended their hospitality. There was something sharp about being the subject of a speech you did not get to deliver. That afternoon, a car pulled up at the Zeller gates. A woman from the local paper had tracked down Fabian and had been given an interview. The story, when it ran, read like a salve. A wealthy man intervened on behalf of a wronged girl. He had a noble bent and would clear the record. Leila read the article with a detached sort of anguish. The headline called her the woman from the video, and the piece framed her as a tragic figure saved by the generosity of Miles Zeller. She had been rescued, in the public's telling. She was grateful for the assistance, but what she did not like was how salvation made her owe loyalty to someone who had offered it largely because of an object. The necklace that had stolen her life now put a gilded cage around her. At dinner that night, Miles asked about her family. He asked questions with care, as if trying not to prod an infection, but not afraid to test whether it had spread. He did not pity her. He did not offer platitudes about how things would soon be fixed. He offered sensible steps, small lines of protection. All of it felt like marshalling against a war whose front line started in a projector's glow. "Do you want to see the footage I mentioned?" he asked. Leila nodded, the words small but steady. Miles gestured, and the assistant dropped a thumb drive onto the table like a key. Fabian set up a laptop with the careful hands of someone who had learned discretion as duty. The screen glowed. Minutes later, a grainy clip filled the room. It began where she remembered, the lane outside Jasper Hall, lamps bleeding into wet cobbles. People moved through the frame like ghosts of a party. A parcel changed hands near a doorway. A delivery man walked with the casual dignity of someone who did not know the stories he would later help write. A woman at a window tilted a camera. The sequence held, then cut, then a strange loop showed the parcel opened, contents shifting. Then a hand, quick, practiced, pressed something small and metal into another hand. Leila saw the clasp. She saw the same engraving she had felt press against her palm in the bus station napkin. She heard nothing but the hum of the laptop, but in her head it was the projector again, the room of chandeliers and 1,000 knives. "Pause," Fabian said. He rewound and zoomed in. In the slowed frame, a face emerged. Not Mr. Zimmer's, not hers. Lana's profile flickered for a careful second, far enough away to be ambiguous, but close enough for a trained eye to notice the line of her jaw and the tilt of her head. Leila's breath left her. "Lana," she began. Miles did not need to say it. He had already seen it. He rubbed his forehead and looked at Fabian. "Enhance the time code," he said. They traced the movement of the parcel back to a caterer who had worked at Jasper Hall a week prior. The caterer remembered a man who had come for late payment and who had left a velvet box without a name. The box had been passed between several hands before landing with a local acquaintance of Mr. Zimmer's. That acquaintance had been paid to film a scene. Someone had staged an ordinary kindness and shot it in a way that would read like desire. "A setup," Fabian said. "Someone wanted the necklace where it would be seen by the town." Leila felt like a person watching her own life from the outside. The pieces slotted together like the jagged edge of a map she never meant to read. Lana's face hovered on the footage. Her practiced composure now read like careful choreography. "Do you have proof she arranged it?" Leila asked, the question sharp as a blade she could not drop. "We have motive and opportunity," Miles said, "and we have witnesses who will testify to the parcel." He tapped the table. "We will get more. We will send this to the right people. We will subpoena the caterer if we need to. We will follow the money." It was a promise chewed at by the teeth of power. He could command resources. He could not force the town to change the way it liked simple stories, but he could make the story harder to believe. Leila sat back and for the first time since the projector's light had turned her life into a spectacle, thought of the future in a way that did not begin with humiliation. It was a careful, thin thought, like a green sprout in mud. It was the thought of evidence lining up, of a town forced to look at what they'd done. "Thank you," she said. It was not gratitude to him so much as an acknowledgement that the machinery of justice had been turned on the hinge of her grief. Miles looked at her, and something like an unreadable emotion surfaced. He had not meant to feel tender toward her. He had meant only to solve a problem. And yet he found himself surveying her as if she were the sum of every small injustice he'd ever seen. For a moment he seemed to wonder whether the family arrangements waiting for him had any weight against who she was, who she had always been. Before they could go further, a message arrived. Fabian read it, then looked at Miles with an expression that meant both relief and alarm. "There's more," he said. "A lab ran a quick check on the metalwork of the clasp. It matches a pattern from an estate sale connected to the Zeller private collection. The clasp was identical. There's a serial etched that only a handful of pieces have. Someone stole it, or it was taken without permission." Miles' jaw tightened. "Then the next stop is Mr. Zimmer," he said. "We find where he got the box. We find who uploaded the clip." Leila listened to the names and the actions as if to a ritual that would cleanse her. But as the hours fell into days and evidence accumulated, a smaller storm blew within her. Nausea at odd times, a tiredness that did not fit the exhaustion of sleepless nights. She missed dinners. She woke early with memories of the old home, a mother's voice, a cow lowing at dawn, a scrape of a spoon against a plate. Once she returned to the mirror to find her face paler than when the video first ruined it. She thought of headaches as small betrayals. She thought they were only in her head. A week later, she sat in the quiet of the Manor's private clinic, because Fabian insisted, and Miles, awkwardly, watched the findings with an intensity she could not read as professional concern or something softer. The doctor smiled like one who knew how to make words land gently. "You're pregnant," she said, as if announcing weather. Time rearranged itself. The news was small and enormous. It made Leila's mouth go dry in a different way. She held the paper like a talisman and thought of all the days ahead, of a child who would not have chosen the gossip and the glare. "Twins," the doctor added, after the ultrasound, matter of fact. "2 heartbeats. Both are strong." 2 heartbeats. The phrase felt almost impossible. In the Manor, news like this became not only private, but political. Miles, who had grown into the awkward role of protector, sat very still. "Are you all right?" he asked. She was, and she was not. She felt an odd tenderness for the small lives inside her, and a bristling anger for what the world had already done to her. She also felt a fear so immediate it tasted of copper. What would the town do if it learned? What would Lana do? Miles' hands hovered above the table like a man unsure of how to touch a glass artifact. "We will keep this discreet," he said finally. "If you want privacy, you will have it. If you want me to—" He stopped. He had never been in a position to say the words that usually come with such offers. There was no script for a man like him protecting a woman like her from a scandal anything but his own to govern. Leila thought of saying no. She had learned to protect herself by shrinking. But there was a line she had grown tired of walking back from. "I don't want to be paraded," she said, "but I don't want the story to be used to steal more of me either." If they can use a little thing like a necklace to take everything, they will use this too. "You won't be alone," Miles said. His voice had grit. "You will have people who know the truth." She pressed her hand to her belly like a promise. "I will not be erased," she said, and for once the words did not feel rehearsed. Word in Jasper Hall travels like a fever. News of the pregnancy, even when guarded, leaked. Rumor took it and reframed it like a fortune teller reading a darker line. That Leila was trying to climb, that she had used the scandal to win sympathy, that she was already bargaining for a place. Lana, who had spent every meeting since the engagement refining her image, tasted danger. A child, especially twins, could complicate the tidy marriage plots she had arranged. So she moved. Lana's maneuvers were quick and efficient. She introduced a friend from town who loudly praised her virtues. She staged sentimental posts on social media about family and honor. She even, privately, began to whisper a more insidious narrative in the hallways of Jasper Hall. That Leila had been using the Zeller's pity to insinuate herself into higher circles. That Leila's children might threaten the alliance they had been negotiating with the Ford family. Liam, who had been awkward with the scandal at the engagement but not cruel, found himself pulled by currents he did not fully command. Parties asked for statements. A cousin took Liam aside and explained, in the language of preservation, that a scandalous future could mean bad press for businesses. The calculus of marriage and money is blunt. Liam began to bend. For all the quiet and strategy at the manor, Leila insisted on visiting Jasper Hall once. She wanted to tell her grandmother that she was to be a mother. She wanted to see the dairy cow one last time. She wanted, selfishly, to stand where her life had been cleaved and see whether anything of her still remained. Miles accompanied her, discreet and steady. The return was a performance for a town that had already written its conclusion. She walked into rooms where eyes had been sharpened by judgment. Some people looked at her with curiosity, some with contempt, others simply stared as if she were the center of a stage they'd been waiting to review. At breakfast, Lana was a portrait of composed grace. She stood, as if rehearsed by 1,000 mirrors, and offered Leila a glass of juice with the sugar of calculated kindness. "How are you feeling?" Lana asked, with the practiced sweetness of someone who uses sentiment to hide calculations. Leila said what was true. "I'm tired," she replied, but there was also firmness in it. She would not be reduced to apology anymore. That afternoon, as a thunderstorm collected over the town, Lana's plan accelerated in a manner that smelled of desperation. She arranged a meeting with family friends and with a local reporter bearing a record of internships and easy scandal. Lana produced a photograph, an edited frame from the original clip, cropped and captioned with a tidy cruelty. She spoke of responsibility and protecting the family. And as she spoke, she unfolded a narrative that placed her at the heart of the community's pain. And then, in a move that shocked even those who loved plotting, Lana staged a collapse. It was a small thing, orchestrated with hands that had learned to plan. She had arranged to meet Liam alone in a conservatory wing. She had taken pills that would make her dizzy. She had rehearsed a hand twitch and chosen the right time for an audience. Cameras, never idle in a small town, caught her as she faltered. She clutched her abdomen and then crumpled, the picture-perfect tableau of a woman betrayed by cruelty. The room panicked. Liam lunged forward. People screamed. For a heartbeat, time condensed to a single point. Lana on the floor, eyes wide, and a room full of accusations searching for a face to hold. "She pushed me," Lana cried between breaths. "She shoved me. She wanted—" The words were quick and aimed. She pointed at Leila, who was frozen like someone learning a new vocabulary of defense. Someone, an aunt, a neighbor, grabbed Leila by the arm. "How could you?" the woman hissed. "She was injured." Leila, dumbstruck, could barely find her voice. "I didn't," she began. "You've ruined everything," Mr. Reed said, his voice a blade. "It's already been too much." The town loved a simple story. A woman collapses, another stands accused. The clip that had once undone Leila flared again, reshaped by emotion and the hunger for clear blame. Before evidence could be produced, before cameras could be subpoenaed, the moral imagination of the town had its temple. Lana, pale and trembling, framed herself as the victim whose broken body needed protection. Miles watched from the doorway as the mob closed in. He saw the ease with which anger stacked itself in neat tiers, and he saw the fragile hand that orchestrated the fall. His jaw tightened. He had expected manipulation. He had not expected the show of it. He moved then, a shadow of a man who had learned to act when others would only talk. He took out his phone and sent an order in 2 words: "Play tapes." Fabian obeyed. He moved through the room like a man who had to break an illusion. He connected the manor's portable device to the conservatory speakers and brought up the footage, the alley clip, the parcel exchange, and then, more crucially now, the conservatory camera that covered the wing where Lana had collapsed. When the conservatory camera feed came up, it showed the meeting. It showed Lana walking with a determined pace. It showed her place near a window where the light fell. It showed a small motion she hoped would be missed, her hand slipping something from her pocket to a plant pot. It showed her stagger, then clutch her stomach. There, in the corner of the frame, a small figure moved, one of Lana's cousins, kneeling to adjust a shoe, and in that action, touching Lana's leg in a way that made it appear she'd been shoved. But the camera, faithful and cruel, showed the articulation. Lana had pressed a small container to her side to make the collapse look real. She had timed a dizzying breath to turn the scene into proof. The room went quiet. The conservatory felt small, the air thick as wool. People who had been quick to point, to record, now had the image of their outrage returned like a mirror that would not lie. "Play that again," Miles said. He did not shout. He did not have to. Fabian rewound, slowed the frame until every twitch of Lana's sleeve could be examined. The planted container showed up in the pixels. A small blister pack, the type that causes faintness. It had been dropped into a plant to be found by an actor on cue. Lana's face, once practiced into composure, paled. For the first time, she looked exposed. She did not have words prepared for being seen on film as an architect of her own suffering. "You staged it," Miles said. Quietly, but the words filled the room. "That is," Lana began. "Enough," Mr. Reed said. His voice, for the first time, carried real fear. "This is disgraceful. You will apologize." An apology might have sufficed if the town had desire only for redemption. But the marks were deeper. People had been fed a spectacle, and they did not like to be tricked. The reporter who had been loyal to Lana's polished story suddenly tilted his head toward the camera and asked, "Who benefited from this?" The question landed like an arrow. Beneficiaries, when named, create paper trails, and those trails can lead to motives. Leila, who had felt the room tilt beneath accusations a week before, found the tilt reversing. It was a strange and intoxicating reversal. People who were quick to accuse watched, and their mirth fell like cracked glass. For a moment, she could not move. Then she stood. "I didn't do this," she said simply. "I never pushed anyone. I never wanted any of this." Her voice had a new firmness. It was not the brittle voice of the girl who had trembled under projectors. It was the voice of someone who had been given a shred of something and decided to keep it. Legal actions followed in the days that came. The local police took statements. The footage from the various cameras was cataloged and sent to a district office already tired of trivialities. The caterer confirmed payment trails. A man who had been paid to film spoke with a trembling honesty and finished by naming a woman who'd commissioned him, a neighbor of the Reeds who had profit in the social rearrangement. Money changed hands to secure a story. There were receipts. Lana's world started to slip, but she did not fall without a fight. Desperation makes people invent new stories on which to build defenses. She began to claim, with dramatic fervor, that a woman like Leila, who had recently been seen in the Zeller house, had bred a kind of envy and plotted to steal a place that did not belong to her. In whispered corners, she began to spread another accusation, one that landed like a thrown stone, that Leila's pregnancy was evidence of a different sin, that the children inside her were signs of calculation meant to entangle the town into accepting a changed order. It was a crude weapon. It preyed on the town's appetite for scandal and the way people quickly accept simple stories over complex truth. But it had one effect. People began to ask about paternity. Questions that should have been private started to buzz in parlors and at the market. Miles, whose interest in Leila had moved from investigation towards something else, felt the pressure hard. He saw how the town had taken a private fact and turned it into a political lever. He did something he had not expected to do. He went public. At a small press gathering near the manor, he stood with a face that looked carved from years of restraint and said what he had been considering in private for days. "Whatever else happens," he said, "Leila will not be used as a pawn. She is not being paraded. These children, no matter their parentage, are not bargaining chips." The words were heavier than he intended, heavier than his usual quiet. They put him at odds with his family. Zeller Sr. called him later, his voice a winter of authority. "You cannot throw away the family's arrangements for a rumor and a charity case," he said. "We have plans." Miles' reply was febrile with something like conviction. "I don't plan to throw anything away. I plan to make sure people are not harmed by lies." The decision hardened in the weeks that followed. Evidence mounted: the parcel chain, the caterer, the paid cameraman, Lana's planted blister pack. Mr. Zimmer, squeezed by a conscience that arrived late, confessed to being paid to place the necklace as a show. He admitted he had been given the bauble by a man who had promised to help him pay a debt. The man, he said, had been seen near Lana's favorite florist. Police followed the money: an envelope, the bank teller's note, a receipt. But legal truths take time. Public opinion is impatient. In that interval, Lana staged another move. She claimed a miscarriage. She picked a sob story from the shelf of melodrama and staged an emotional scene in the family ward at the local hospital, where she fainted and then claimed her pregnancy had been harmed by the stress Leila caused. It was a lie, filmed and spread. People wept for her. Some turned away from Leila again. However, where Lana had staged pain, Leila had real fear. She went to the hospital not as an actor, but as a woman whose body sheltered two fragile lives. The doctor's face was calm but serious as tests were run. "Your twins are strong," the doctor said, after an ultrasound in a room humming with machines. "There may be some stress markers, but it's manageable. Rest, fewer visitors, less noise." Leila's relief was raw. She thought of the twist of life that had brought her here, from a napkin in a bus to a clinic in a manor, with cameras and family politics hot at the edges. She thought of the babies she would never let be bargaining chips. In the hospital hallway, Miles stood as if he were holding himself together with purpose. He had collected evidence. He had set traps for truth with the patience of a man who had lived in boardrooms where paper maps decided destinies. He had a plan now that asked for a public reckoning. He invited the Reeds and several town leaders to a meeting at the Zeller estate. He would not let it be a spectacle. He insisted it be an airing of facts. The room filled with relatives, local press, and a small contingent of the Zeller household. Fabian moved around with the calm of a man who keeps secrets in his pocket and pulls them out when needed. The footage played again. This time, Miles had compiled frames and receipts and bank transfers and read them aloud. He read the name of the florist who had been paid with a check. He read the account that had transferred funds. He read the caterer's statement. He traced the sting of money from a figure connected to a local influencer to the cameraman who had filmed the alley. Lana's face had gone from pale to defensive. "This is a setup," she said. "It is dishonorable to accuse me like this." "You're the one who staged the fall," Miles said. He had the ghost of restraint in his voice, but his eyes carved the air. "You planted the pills. You instructed people. You paid for the footage." Lana's eyes flashed. "You," she began. Fabian had been quieter than usual. He stepped forward. "We found a receipt," he said. He held a paper that trembled like a confession. It had Lana's initials, the florist's note, and a bank transfer. It was small and ugly and perfectly damning. The room's tone shifted again. The Reeds' faces, which had once accepted denunciation as a social hygiene, now contorted into something like regret. Mr. Reed's mouth closed and opened as if trying to construct a sentence that would match the shame in his chest. Family elders murmured. "This is unforgivable," someone whispered. Lana did not stand. She clung to the script she had written. "You cannot," she said. "I did what I thought would protect us." Protecting by deception is a bitter logic. The crowd smelled it. Ambition mingled with fear. There were murmurs of legal action. Police officers who had sat politely in the back now took notes with new fervor. Then, in the rush of proof and confession, two things happened that no one expected. First, Miles made a public declaration that sent ripples through the room. He stepped forward, eyes steady, and said, "Leila Reed is not to be blamed. She has been subjected to a cruel and calculated plan. I stand by her." The second thing was quieter but deeper. He turned to Leila and, in front of everyone, took her hand. The gesture burned through the room like a bright, unplanned sunbeam. "I will not let a family ledger decide her worth," he said. "These children, her children, deserve protection. I will ensure that they are safe and welcomed." There was a stunned silence. The elder Zeller, who had once planned alliances, looked at his son with a face that tried to parse the strange geography of love and loyalty. Miles's public protection was a declaration more political than romantic in that moment. It was a refusal of the old calculus. Lana, who had hoped for a tidy victory by creating sympathy, felt the floor slip. Her plan had depended on making the town choose a simple enemy. Instead, the town watched a man choose something that confounded calculations. The legal fallout moved like weather. Charges were brought against the men who had accepted payment to stage the clip and the actors who had aided Lana. Police interviews revealed layers of collusion. Lana's complicity was in the paper trail, not years of heated confession. She was charged with fraud against the community's social trust and with staging a harmful incident. The charges were not the only consequence. The tablets of reputation crack in ways that never fully mend. But the deepest shift was not legal. It was social and intimate. Miles' choice sent a message. Someone with stature could refuse to play the game's old rules. He refused to let Leila be punished further for a scandal engineered to remove her. He refused to let the children inside her be used to tie a knot around his family's alliances. In public and private, he made small but decisive acts. He signed affidavits supporting her claims, he commissioned private security, and he placed Fabian in charge of liaising with the Reeds to make sure no one else attempted to exploit the situation. Miles' actions changed how people thought of Leila. The town had been hungry for a simple story. Now they were confronted with someone who refused to be simple. Some softened. A few apologized. Some, stubborn in their cruelty, spat gossip into quieter corners. But the tide of narrative had turned. Lana's fall was not simply a public humiliation. It became, tragically, a private unmasking. She was forced into therapy sessions and into a small hearing where her motives and lies were examined. The family fractured. Some relatives, who had been quick to line up with the stronger horse, now recoiled. Mr. Reed, who had once ordered Leila's containment, was forced to reckon with how he had been used by ambition. He visited Leila privately once, his voice small and rough with unnamed feelings. He offered no grand apologies, he was not that kind of man, but he asked, haltingly, if she could ever forgive him. Leila listened. Forgiveness was not a contract she could sign lightly. She had tasted the edges of the town's cruelty. She had held small things against her chest that had once been thoughtless and turned them into shields. She told him, after a long pause, that she could not forget. But she could, perhaps, let the future be different. It would not be an easy reconciliation, and it should not be, she thought. Meanwhile, inside the manor where the wealthy tend to deal in futures as if they were stone, Miles negotiated for more than reputation. He negotiated for Leila's peace. He negotiated for her dignity. The title of the story, when people later told it, was simple. He loved the wrong sister. Many thought that meant he loved Leila when he had been expected to love Lana. That was partly true, but the heart of the truth was more complicated. Miles had fallen not into a sudden romance, but into a recognition. He had seen a woman who had been wounded by a small town and a large family, and had decided not to let that wound define the rest of her life. That decision became a public thing. Zeller Sr., who had been the oldest map of arrangements and grudges, watched his son choose differently. There was friction. There were arguments behind closed doors. The Zeller family meetings became tense. But the movement could not be stopped entirely. Public displays of support and private promises began to rewire the family's alliances. As the months moved, the pregnancy became a center of gravity. Leila's belly grew like a secret that needed no permission. People who had turned up their noses found themselves looking at bellies in shop windows with new curiosity. Some softened. Some, bitterly, invented new rumors. But the facts insisted themselves. 2 heartbeats grew into 2 small, kicking lives. The hospital, which had once been a place where Lana staged pain, became the place where truth gathered. In a room that smelled of antiseptic and coffee, Leila labored with a dignity that was not performative. Miles held her hand the way someone holds an important ledger, with care. Fabian hovered with the quiet presence of a man who understood that some moments require fidelity more than words. The birth was long and fierce. There were hours when time condensed into precise pain and small victories. Leila cried with laughter and exhaustion. She named the feelings, fear, joy, rage, like people she had to welcome into a household. When they first cried, 2 small babies were placed on her chest, warm and wailing and perfect in their smallness. Miles, who had watched, understood a kind of pleading in the world's eyes, an expectation that he would now sign his name to a new story. He did not rush. He sat in the corner like a man who had learned to wait for what was real rather than what was convenient. Later, at a small press event, because the town insisted on closure and the press demanded images, Miles stood beside Leila and made a decision that would be retold in saloons and parlors and in the nervous columns of gossip pages. "I will claim responsibility for these children," he said. "Not because of lineage alone, but because I refuse to let them be used to hurt anyone. They will be safe. They will not be bargaining chips. They will be loved." The words were heavier than the room expected. Zeller Sr.'s look was a ledger torn in 2. Some in the crowd applauded. Others murmured about rashness and dynasties. Lana, who watched from afar, felt the remaining scaffolding of her plans collapse. Leila, who had been through accusation, hospital, and humiliation, felt herself change shape. She was no longer the girl who only reacted. She had become someone who acted. She had also, painfully, learned how to ask for things. "I will raise them," she said quietly. "I will give them the things my life didn't give me all at once: protection, truth, choice. And I will not be erased." It was not a statement of victimhood. It was a proclamation of agency. The resolution did not erase cost. Lana faced consequences. She lost the engagement and the public's favor. She had to rebuild a life without easy manipulations. She was forced, in therapy and in law, to confront the emptiness that had driven her to stage pain. Some of the family refused to speak to her. Others tried, and she found forgiveness was not simple. Mr. Reed, who had once believed reputation was the ledger of the family, learned that reputations could be redeemed only by deeds. He visited Leila again, this time with a paper in his hand. An old deed to a small parcel of land he offered as an apology for the years of indifference. It was not salvation. It was an attempt. Leila accepted it with a small, guarded grace. As for Miles, the choice he made did not transform overnight the rules of lineage. There were murmurs, as always, that dynasties do not shift by sentiment alone. But within the Zeller house, a small revolution took place. The elder began to respect his son not less for his deviation, but more for his courage. Months after the birth, there was a public event where Leila stood under a marquee at Jasper Hall and looked out over a crowd that had once watched, hungry for spectacle. This time, the crowd watched with different eyes. Some had come to gawk. Some had come to apologize. Some had come because they had nothing better to do. Miles stood by Leila not as a shield only, but as a partner who had chosen her. Lana, invited by a sense of duty, and perhaps also curiosity about the life she had once tried to inherit, stood at a distance. Her eyes met Leila's across the crowd. There was no dramatic collapse. There was only a small nod, an acknowledgement of the cost. At the center of the evening, Miles offered a ring. It was not a ring of instant answers. It was a promise, small, material, and public. He did not kneel with the theatrics of a man playing at conquest. Instead, he spoke with a voice that had become steady because he had chosen consequences over convenience. "Leila," he said, "you have been wronged. You have been brave above what I expected. Will you let me stand with you in what comes next?" She looked at the ring, the same small world of metal that had once been the cause of a scandal, and saw how objects can be used to wound and to mend. It flashed in the light, and the room breathed. She took a breath, thinking of two small heartbeats that had once made her future uncertain and now made it solid. She thought of a family that had learned its lessons the hard way. She thought of Lana and how ambition had nearly broken them all. "Yes," she said. The place erupted with a noise that was less of applause and more of release. People who had been waiting for a tidy ending found one they had not expected. The woman from the forbidden night, once a phrase mouthed with cruelty, had returned not to steal a place, but to claim one by force of truth and choice. She had been given a ring and had accepted the right to define herself on her own terms. There were complications still. Questions about paternity, about legal settlements, about family ties did not vanish. Some relationships took years to heal. But the core truth remained simple. A single necklace had sought to write a story for her. She had refused to let that story complete her. She had taken her place, not because of the necklace, but because she had demanded it. The town, which liked neatness, eventually found a new rhythm. Gossip survived.
Human hearts are not easily reshaped into virtue. But the broadcast clip that had once made 1,000 phones glow now became a cautionary tale about the cruelty of making judgments on a single image. People spoke of Leila in new terms, as a woman who had been wronged and had risen. Some used the language of pity, others grudging respect. In the end, the triumph was not in spectacle. It was a quieter, steadier thing. Leila, standing with 2 small children at her hip, talking with a woman who had once been her rival. They spoke haltingly, like anyone learning to build a fragile bridge. "I never meant to hurt you," Lana said, voice low. Leila looked at her and saw not a monster, but a person broken by hunger for something she had been taught was the only currency. "You did," Leila said, "but I am not the only one who can forgive." It was not a full absolution. It was the beginning of something that might lead, in time, to a different way of living. People will tell this story in different ways. Some will say Miles loved the wrong sister. Some will say the woman from the forbidden night took her place. The truth, perhaps messier and richer, is that a girl who had been humiliated refused to be small. She returned to claim a life for herself and for her children. She did not let a necklace write her fate. In the years that followed, Leila's children grew with the quiet knowledge that their mother had stood against a town and won, not by spectacle, but by insisting on truth.
Miles and Leila built a life that was neither a fairy tale nor a ledger of bargains. It was a life made from choices, daily, imperfect, courageous. And sometimes, when the light of the manor falls on the garden, Leila will touch the small engraved clasp that once started the story. Keep it in a drawer and remember how easily the world can be led astray by an image. She will also remember how stubbornly the truth will return if someone is willing to look for it. If this twist moved you, subscribe to follow the next chapter of Leila's life and watch how a small town learns to reckon with bigger truths.